Hi, everyone, and welcome to part 4 of your first week class of 3D modeling. My name is David, and we're about to get started talking about editable polys. What we've done so far, we've worked on using simple objects inside 3D Studio Max using our standard primitives menu on the right-hand side of our screen. I'm just minimizing my scene and layer manager. On the right-hand side of our screen, we've been working in the Create panel, going to our geometry, and we've been working in standard primitives using these shapes. And now we're going to learn how to expand upon that by doing much more than just using the basic shapes that are allowed in 3D Studio Max. We're going to start editing them. And to do so, we're going to work in what's called edit poly and editable poly. So the first step we need to do is actually create a box. So just create a box any size you want, just like this. Right click, we're out of box mode. So now we're going to learn how to go into the modify panel. So we've been working in the command panel at the right hand side of our screen, and we've been in the create panel. We need to go one over and go to the modify panel. So in the modify panel, we have the information of the 3D model we currently have selected, and we're able to add modifiers. Right now, I'm going to show you what this parameter box looks like. So if you have an object selected, you're going to see the name of the object. And right now we have box 001. We're able to rename it right here. So I'm going to call this yellow box. Just like that. Now it's called yellow box, including in our scene and layer manager. We can change the color of our object right here, which I'll leave as let's make it a little bit more yellow. There we go. And now we change the color. We have what's called a modifier list, and it has a little arrow beside it, which tells us it's a drop down. The modifier list has all the modifiers we're able to use inside our object, use on our object, I should say, sorry. Basically, what modifiers are is it's different ways to modify our object using different tools. If we scroll down the list, we can see tools such as bend, cloth, chamfer, crease. We can keep going up and down, and there's tons of different ways to manipulate our objects inside 3D Studio Max. Now, that's the modifier list. Here's the modifier panel, or the modifier box, I should say. And when you look in this, you should see that we've created, like for instance, in our scene, we've created a box. So we have a box modifier already in our list, which is now selected. It's the only one there, so it's already blue, which means it's active. And you'll notice that there's a parameter list underneath here. Now, these parameters are part of the box modifier. We're able to modify this shape by just changing these parameters. For instance, I can change the length and the width and the height. I can either type in a new number, or I can left click and drag on these arrows to change the length, the width, and the height. I can also add more segments. Now, right now, our box is 1 by 1 by 1, which means that there's only one length, one width, and one height. If you go to your scene and push F4 on your keyboard, we have edge faces on. And if you push F3 on your keyboard, this is the wireframe of our box, which means that every side looks like one polygon. One polygon is made of true triangles to make a square. And so we have 1 polygon, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 polygons on our model. Now look what happens when I add a length segment to it. You can see now we actually have more polygons to work with. And I can do the same by adding width and height. I'm going to push F3 again to go back into edge face mode, which was F4 on our keyboard. F4. Sorry. There we go. Like that. And now we have much more polygons to play around with. So when we start modifying our 3D object, we want a certain amount of polys that we think are necessary for a 3D model. So it's good to think about it beforehand how much detail you're going to need out of your simple object before you start modifying it. So give it enough segments. So right now, I think 222 should be plenty. We don't need a lot of polygons. We're just going to work on starting to learn how to alter our shapes using our basic tools. So once we're done playing around with the box modifier and creating the right parameters, we're actually going to add a new modifier from the list. And we're going to add an edit poly modifier. There's two ways to do that. Once you click on modifier list, you can just drag down and find edit poly right here. Or if you open up the modifier list, you can actually type it in on your keyboard. For instance, I'm about to type in edit poly. And there you go. It actually goes to it right in the list. So if you learn of modifiers that you really, really like edit poly, push, optimize, or anything else, You can actually just write it in as the modifier list is open and then click on it to access it. So I've just added the edit poly modifier to my list. And now you'll see that the parameter boxes down here have changed. Once I click on box, you see that this is the box parameters. But if I go to edit poly, we have a huge list of parameters that open up. Now this is where it gets more complex in 3D Studio Max. And this is where we actually start really modeling in 3D Studio Max. If you notice in edit poly, there's an arrow beside it. If you click on that arrow, we're going to open up sub-menu options for our edit poly modifier: vertex, edge, border, polygon, and element. This will become available in a document I will send with this video as well that you can download if you look in the description, or you'll be linked to it in the email as well. These are all different modes to access your 3D model. I'm going to maximize my viewport right now so we can get a clearer view of what I'm about to do. So the first option I'm going to play around with is just I'm going to click on vertex mode. You're going to notice in vertex mode, little blue dots appear around where edges connect. The reason why those appear is they're telling us where the vertex points of our 3D models have been created. You can actually click on them right now, on these blue points. These vertex points are created, like I said, where every edge intersects, where polygons meet other polygons. The reason why they're there is to just be helpful modifiers for you to modify your 3D model. So, like I said before, and we've worked on this when we started moving around simple objects, the WER keys, move, rotate, scale, also work here. So while I'm in vertex mode, which is blue, which means it's active, I can click W. And you can see the move tool pops up, E, R, they're all there. And we can actually click on these, just like we clicked on our objects before. Hold Control to click more, hold Alt to have less in the selection, and we can move, and we can rotate, and we can scale them how we see fit. So that's vertex mode. Vertex mode allows us to select points between edges and allows us to modify them using move, rotate, and scale. Not overly complex, right? I think you'd understand that. If you don't, please rewind the video and look at it one more time. Vertex is points between edges that we can select, move, rotate, and scale. Not too big of a deal. We also have edge, and edges is exactly as it sounds. Every white line you see on a 3D model is an edge, and you can click on them and select them and move, rotate, and scale them as well. Let's say I wanted to create a quick house out of this model. Easy, placeholder house. And then we can push it down, we can modify the sides here, like so. So holding Control to select more, hold Alt to select less, of course. There you go, and I created a simple heart shape. So edge mode allows us to select the edges of a 3D model. The next step we're going to look at is what's called border. Now we won't be able to access border right now, but what border does is it's able to select any polygons that have an empty space between them. So right now there is no empty polygons, there is no deleted polygons. But if I were to, let's say, have a deleted polygon, I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit, like so, where I can see the inside of my 3D model, border now works, and it turns into a crosshair when I come over an open border. It selects the entire open border, and I'm able to modify that entire open border how I see fit. Move, rotate, and scale. Always practice over and over again with the move, rotate, scale tool. W-E-R on your keyboard. Like I said when we first started, I'm going to burn those keys in your head because they are the most important keys inside 3D Studio Max. So border allows us to access open holes in our 3D model. Currently there are no open holes. I deleted one to make space, but there are no open holes, and border is only used for those. I'll detail more about the border tool later on because it will be very handy, trust me. We're about to go into polygon mode. Now polygon mode allows us to select polygons. Simple enough. Polygons are made of two triangles. If it's just a triangle, then you can access just a triangle. But polygon mode allows us to access the polygons here, and we can move, rotate, and scale them as well. The same way we can do with everything else. Now element's a little bit of a different tool. Sometimes there's multiple 3D objects inside one object that are all attached together but not welded together. Element allows you to select those different parts. For instance, right now my heart is completely welded and sealed shut on its own. So if I were to click element mode, then click the heart, it just selects the whole thing. So vertex is the points between edges that we can select, move, rotate, and scale. Edge are the actual edges of our 3D model. 4 edges make the outside of a polygon. Border allows us to access open holes in our model and allows us to grab all the edges of an open hole. Polygon allows us to select polygons of our model. And element allows us to select different objects inside an object. So if there were multiple hearts that were attached together, that's how that would work. So vertex, edge, border, polygon, element. Using these modify tools, we're able to modify our 3D object. So for instance, I created a heart. What I'd like you to do is follow these steps and create a simple house with me. I'm going to create a box, like so. And I'd like you to create a box as well. I'd like you to go to the modify panel, and I'd like you to add from the modifier list to edit poly. Remember, you can scroll down the list, click on edit poly, or you can type in edit poly when the modifier list is open, and it will find it. And then you can hit enter on the keyboard or left click on edit poly to add it. Once you add it, you can just click on this arrow right here, click on vertex mode, and I'd like you to lift the roof up of the house. I'd like you to expand the roof slightly. And expand the base. To do that, I'm on the scale tool right now. You'll notice that my R key is active, the scale tool is active right there. So any vertex I highlight at this moment will be using the scale tool. I can change that to the move tool if I'd like, or the rotate tool. I'm just creating something cartoony and simple. So as you were playing around with the simple objects before when you originally created your box character, it works the exact same way. Learning how to use the W and E R keys over and over and manipulate your object are going to become very key. So now I'd like you to create different parts to go with your house. I'm going to create a door. I have a door right here made out of a box. I can change the amount of segments I need. If you find that maybe you need more segments in one direction than another, that's absolutely fine. I know my door needs a bit of a curve, so I gave it more height segments. I click on my modifier list. I add an edit poly modifier. I click on the arrow to open up the drop down with all the different options, and I'm going to go to vertex mode. Really, I'm going to be playing around in vertex mode quite a bit first. And I'm going to put a little door here. This house is very cartoony, so everything's kind of curved a bit. And I'm going to use the move, rotate, and scale tool to adjust everything. Now I have a house with a weird door. Just very simple objects. All I'm doing is I'm learning how to manipulate objects. So I created a simple house. I mean, I can keep my house, and you can expand by making, let's say, a mailbox. And I'm going to add an edit poly modifier here. Vertex, and I'm going to go to scale. I'm going to create a box. I'm going to change the amount of segments in this box since I don't need it to open or do anything much. I'm going to go to my modify panel, and I can see the segments down here, and I'm going to change it. Remember that even if you add an edit poly modifier on top of your 3D model, you can still see the box modifier below it. So you're still able to modify the amount of segments. Now be careful though, if you modify the amount of segments after you're done manipulating a model and changing a lot of the shape of it, it may alter your model back to its original shape, and then you'd lose all your work. You don't want to do that. Be sure to save your scene constantly. Don't forget in the top left of 3D Studio Max, we have the 3 max key, and we have save and save as. Try and save increments of your scene, such as house 01, house 02, or character 01, character 02. And don't forget to always back up your data about every 5 minutes or so, or after you do something very big, just keep saving it. Very important, very key. Right now I have a little mailbox, I have a door, I have a house. I'm going to create a couple of spheres here and squish them using the scale key. I'm going to turn off edge faces mode. I'm going to hold shift and use the move tool to duplicate these. I'm going to use the scale tool. I'm going to kind of create a unique pathway. I'm going to grab multiple of these and hold shift and duplicate it. Now I have a little pathway into my house. This is just learning how to play around with simple shapes and objects, not only creating and mirroring, creating and cloning them and copying them, but also just modifying them. So for instance, we were playing around a lot with the box, but let's say I wanted to play with a cylinder. All the same methods still apply to the cylinder. If I push F4 on my keyboard, I can see the edged faces, all the polygons of my 3D model. If I go into my modify panel, I'm able to change the parameters of this cylinder. I can change the radius, the height, how many height segments there are, how many cap segments there are, and I always suggest if you're going to work in a cylinder or tube or anything like that, make cap segments. Never leave it empty like this, because if we start working in higher polygon or put it in a different scene, we won't be able to animate it very well. So always trying to add a cap segment so it looks something closer to this. And then we can change the amount of sides as well. Something more triangular, give it a square look. Make something like this. And then we can click on here and type in edit poly, and we can start modifying this object as we see fit. Now, some of what we want to do is modifying this object. I'm just going to grab this, grab polygons. So try and play around with the most commonly used modes that I think are most commonly used would be vertex, edge, and polygon. You'll notice now I'm making some sort of tube. I'm just going to use the scale tool here. And now we get like a little tube, creating very simple objects. So what we're doing is we're taking the base objects that 3D Studio Max is giving us and creating simple objects using those simple shapes. The one tool I'd recommend to learn, the first tool, is when you go to edit poly mode, you're going to notice that we have a list of parameters down here, of course. If you scroll down the list of parameters, we have things like edit poly mode, is there animation mode, but we have selection mode. Now, selection mode actually contains a visual of the different modes available in our modifier list. You see vertex, edge, polygon, border, element. They're actually visible here as well. If you highlight and hover your mouse above them, you'll notice that it actually shows you the different modes visually. And if you click on one of them, it changes the edit mode down here. You'll see edit polygons, edit borders, edit edges, edit vertices, edit elements. Those are different tools you have access to when you're playing around the different modes. The one thing I'd like you to remember is that all modes, including if no mode is active and you just click on edit poly, have an attach, which allows you to attach another 3D model to this one. So for instance, if you're building a model that's a little bit more complex or has multiple shapes, I'm going to build a sword out really quick, out of boxes, just as a quick example. You'll notice my sword is made out of 3 shapes. We have the handle, sword, and the guard. Don't forget to name your objects. There's the guard. Just using the scale tool here to adjust. Guard, handle, and blade. Now sometimes, especially when you want to unwrap something, you'll want to attach them together, unwrap, and then detach them. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an edit poly modifier to this object. And then I'm going to go down my list into edit geometry, and I'm going to go to the attach tool. Now that the attach is now the active mode, my mouse appears normal, but when I hover above another 3D Studio Max object, it goes into a crosshair, meaning that if I click on it, it's about to attach it to this guard. So if I do that, what you're going to notice on the Scene and Layer Manager here, and what you're going to see is that this material is pink, and this is the guard. If I attach this, this becomes pink because it is now a part of the guard. And there's only 2 objects in my scene now, the blade and the guard. The handle is no longer a separate object. And I attach the blade as well. Now this is all called one object. this is now our sword. It is all one object together. So if I click on this, it is now one whole object that can be unwrapped as one whole object, and it can be animated and modeled as one whole object. And now if I go to Edit Poly in Vertex mode, we can modify the entire object. You'll also notice that in Element mode, we can select the different parts of the object. Like I said, you can have separate parts of an object. As long as they're not organically modeled together or welded together, you can access separate parts of a 3D model by clicking Element mode and accessing that. This is a good way to attach all your models together, unwrap it to get your texture map, and then you can detach. To detach a model, you simply have to go into Element mode or Edit Poly mode. Whatever polygons you have selected are part of the object. You go down the list into Edit Geometry again, and you go to Detach. Once you detach, it becomes a separate object again, and we can rename it to whatever we need to call it. Now the blade is separate again, I can call it blade. And I can keep going like this. I can take the guard, detach it, and I'm going to call it guard. And now my three objects are all separated again. Be sure to practice attaching and detaching objects after you modify shapes to exactly the way you want to make one solid mesh together. So for instance, if I have this box here, and I'm going to change the blade, let's say I'm going to make this, we're on edge faces mode, so I know how many polygons are going to be visible. I'm going to add a couple more polygons to play around with here. I'm going to take away this one. I'll leave it like that. I'm going to go to my Modify panel, Edit Poly. I'm going to go to Vertex mode. I'm going to play around with these vertexes a little bit. I'm going to make this look more sword-like. To do that, I'm going to use a Scale tool, go across my model so I can grab all the vertexes in the middle. I'm going to pull out this vertex here. Now I know this isn't the most accurate sword in the world. I apologize for that. But we're just creating a very simple object, and we can always replace the blade here and move it. And you can always attach these parts too. You can attach any two objects or three objects or as many objects as you want in 3D Studio Max. So in Edit Poly mode, like I said, attach. And then if you're in element mode, we can detach entire elements. If you're in polygon mode, you can still detach just specific polygons. So if you only want this part detached of your 3D model, we can detach just that part. It's always in the Edit Geometry menu, down in the parameters of the Edit Poly. So if we have polygon mode, vertex, element, whatever mode we have active, if we have something selected, go to your Edit Geometry menu, and we always have attach and detach. Two very important tools to remember. So playing around in our modify panel, playing around with vertex, edge, border, polygon, element, try and create something cool with it. Try and create a sword, try and create a shield, anything like that will come in really handy to learn how to play around with vertex, edge, border, polygon, and element mode to make objects you want. Don't forget to attach and detach if you need to put objects together into one shape. Um, Also doing so, we're going to learn about a couple more tools that will become really handy, which I'll explain in my next video coming up in part 5, where we're going to learn how to edit a model to come together using different tools like mirror, attaching using the mirror, and the smoothing group tool, which is going to become really important because as you see in the blade in my video, we have some smoothing group issues, and I'll explain exactly why this happens and how we can fix that to make it look like an actual nice sword blade, or when objects need to be smooth or not smooth, we can alter that. And that will be in the next part video coming up. Thanks very much for watching. Look forward to the next part.